Hi students, it's Mrs. T, and we are going to talk about the demographic transition model in this video. So this is something that you have read about in chapter 2, and it is, in general, the demographic transition model means the ways in which a population changes within a country or within a place over time. That's the transition is a change, and of course demographics looks at the composition of a population. What sorts of people live there, what are their ages, what do they do, what's their education level, and that kind of thing. And so we in geography, we put this concept of the demographic transition into a model or a graphic that you can see on the board behind me or on the screen behind me. And there's 5 different stages for demographic transition that we're going to go through really quickly together. And this graphic is linked in our weekly folder in case it's hard for you to see it. I'm sure it's probably easier if you just open it yourself and look at it on your screen. It's probably easier than trying to see it behind me on this video. But there are 5 stages to demographic transition that have been estimated or proposed by geographers and demographers over the years. And this is called demographic transition, and it looks at the concepts that you've learned in a previous lecture about a natural increase rate, or NIR, of a population, crude birth rate, crude death rate, and it combines all of those things to look at how populations in a place over time are affected by the type of technology, the type of food getting strategy, the type of work that people do, and this kind of thing. And it affects the number of people that an area can support. So we looked at population densities, and we know that not every place can support every person who might want to live there. There are some challenges to that. Well, as we have development in world societies, that is increased industrialization and something in the first place called the Industrial Revolution. As that machines take the place of some human labor, we see a lot of changes that happen in society. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. So let's just look at this demographic transition model and learn how to interpret it. So there are 5 stages, and let's start with number 1. The first stage is called the high stationary stage, and that's because we look at the population rate, and it doesn't really increase or decrease significantly. It might increase just a teeny tiny little bit during the first stage, but it doesn't just spike and go way up. And this is because in this type of society, some of which still exists today, you don't use modern conveniences. So this is either a historic period where you didn't have machines that could do anything, you didn't have complex tools, and you might not have even had complex knowledge about how to keep seeds from one season to the next and plant it and modify the land. Throughout most of human history, like 40,000 years I'm talking about, most human groups who survived all that time did not manipulate the environment in order to survive. We foraged for food, which includes hunting and gathering and collecting the things that we needed to survive every day. And so that means that we were much more in tune to the natural environment, much more dependent upon the seasons, much more dependent upon all the other things in the natural environment that might affect our food supply. And we had a much broader idea of what was in the food supply. For instance, I grew some tomatoes just in my little backyard garden this past summer, and I had a grasshopper problem. I had some grasshoppers that would come and eat some of my leaves. And so I'd catch the grasshoppers and I'd toss it to the chickens. But the thought occurred to me, because I have studied this, that back in foraging days, I'm talking about 35,000 years ago, if I was part of a culture that used everything available in my environment to eat, those grasshoppers would not be chicken food. They would be my food, because they're perfectly edible for human beings. But you and I, some of you are probably like wrinkling your face up right now because I said that, simply because that's not part of our culture, right? We really are controlled a lot by what the rules are. There's my air quotes, the rules are in our society. And eating that grasshopper ourselves instead of giving it to the chickens is not something that would even enter our thought process, unless you had studied something like that, like I have in the past. So anyway, there was plenty of food, but there wasn't a lot of time in your day to spend doing anything other than collecting food and processing it and eating it. And so you had a really high birth rate, but you didn't have a lot of people lived to ripe old age. And so you had a high death rate also. And part of this was because sometimes food insecurity, but also there wasn't any medical knowledge or care or systems. Like everything in the natural environment just flourished, and that includes infectious diseases, bugs, bacteria, and parasites and stuff like this that that really caused problems for people in terms of their life expectancy. It killed us quickly, in other words, and none of those things had been eradicated or controlled until human culture changed. And so in stage 2 of the demographic transition model, we see human culture changing, and it's because of the agricultural revolution. Now, I know you've heard of the Industrial Revolution, but the agricultural revolution occurred way before that. And it is when people gained knowledge, and developed strategies in order to produce a predictable amount of food and even a surplus amount of food. They manipulated their environment and they modified the soil health and the irrigation patterns and all this kind of stuff all by hand, using our own elbow grease, as my grandmother would say. All by hand they did this, and it required a lot of manual labor and a lot of people to do that labor, but people got healthier and people got more, had longer lifespans because of that. And so you saw the increase of the population. The NIR went up, the natural increase rate, because people still had a lot of babies, but people weren't dying as young as they had in the past because of all the benefits that agriculture brought to society. So if you have a surplus, you're much healthier. If you've got a lot of calories available to you, something like the cold or the flu or something like that went around back when you were foragers, it wouldn't necessarily get you every time because you probably had more body fat. You just had more minerals and nutrients available to you in a more predictable amount. And therefore you had a lot of babies who were born surviving to older ages than they had before. And people needed a lot of babies because in the agricultural revolution, you're doing all the work by hand. So we're not talking about any kind of machinery here. We're talking about our own elbow grease and simple tools that we've built ourselves, digging sticks and hoes and shovels and maybe a blade that you pull behind an oxen or something. But we're not talking about any mechanized vehicles or anything, because that came with the second agricultural revolution that coincided with the Industrial Revolution. And so we're going to focus on the Industrial Revolution and the second agricultural revolution in another video, but this essentially corresponds to the section on the demographic transition model called Stage 3. So during stage 3, when the Industrial Revolution completely and totally changed the need for hands-on manual labor on the farm, you still had to have hands-on labor, but if you needed 20 people to work on the farm before machines were invented and a way to get a tractor to run a steam engine where you fed it coal and you burned it and used the pressure from the steam to drive it, when that came into being, it eliminated the need for all those extra hands on the farm. Instead, you could do the work of 20 people with one machine. And so those 20 people still existed. They still needed a job. And so they would go to cities. They would work in factories that made the machines that took their place out on the farm. And there were a lot of other jobs that you saw really expand. You saw education levels go up because not everybody had to work on the farm, so there was more time to go and get an education. There was more time for scientific research. You saw medical research happen and start to understand how to control infectious diseases and stuff like this. And so all of this happened. Really, that's one of the things one of the reasons why you see what happened in stage 3 of the demographic transition model, why you see it depicted that way. The birth rate went down, not rapidly, but the birth rate started to go down because over time, people started realizing we didn't need as huge of a family as we did before because we don't need all those farmhands. The cheapest way to get labor at your house is to have kids. And so it always has been that way. And so if you don't need that many farm laborers anymore, that means you don't need as big of a family as you might have had 100 years ago or 150 years ago or something, right? And so it took a while for people to grow accustomed to the fact that we didn't need so many children, and they stopped having so many. It went from 15 to 12 and from 12 to 9 and smaller than that over time. And so in stage 3, you saw the birth rate, the crude birth rate start to go down, and the crude death rate continued to go down as it was doing in stage 2. And that's because you had so many innovations, not only in the machinery, but there was a scientific revolution also, and we had better ways of managing public health and more people to focus their lives into research in that and development in that area instead of just in farming with manual labor and things like that. You needed fewer children, and there were just all kinds of improvements that happened in society in general during this time. And so you saw that birth rate go down, death rate continue to go down, the population increased. Okay, and so that brings us to stage 4 of the demographic revolution, the demographic transition. And so I guess 20 years ago or so, most geographers would say that the Western world today, was in stage 4 of the demographic transition. Now, most of us say that we have a 5th stage. And so in the graphic that I selected for you to look at, you'll see a 5th stage with a question mark in it. And that's because we can see evidence, especially in the last 20, 30 years or so, we can see demographic evidence that people are having fewer and fewer babies. Women are waiting longer and longer before they begin to have babies or have them at all. And we also have such advancements in healthcare that most of the infectious diseases that spread through contact, most of those things, we control very, very well with vaccines or even clean water resources and clean sewer resources and those kinds of development issues. Worldwide, we have, so many things that have improved our general public health. You don't have to worry about your water supply being contaminated. Are you going to get sick if you just brush your teeth with it, and this kind of thing? We eliminated that from the public realm in most places in Western culture, and that therefore what we focus on instead is disease and healthcare that looks at chronic diseases that maybe we have given ourselves, like type 2 diabetes or heart disease or something. Now we don't have the problem of dying young because we have few calories or an infectious disease. Now we have so many calories that a lot of the diseases that we have, even infertility in some studies, suggest that it's certain types of foods that we consume that prohibits conception in some cases. That's a minor reason as to why people are having fewer babies. But one of the major transitions in people's minds is that since you don't need babies anymore to be workers in the household, most people now, instead of thinking of a child as a benefit to a lifestyle, it's usually a cost to a lifestyle. I think it's Time magazine, or one of those magazines that publishes every year. It publishes how much it costs for a family to bring a child into the world up to the 18th birthday. And then I think they go on and say, if they go to this kind of school or that kind of school, this is how much it would cost. And it was something like, I think the last time I looked at it a few years ago, it was something like $350,000 was the average cost that you put into a child when, from birth until 18, when they are supposed to be on their own. And so you do hear some sarcasm in my voice there. Anyway, so we really see a lot of decline in birth rate, but the death rate is still slowly going down. You see longevity. It's one of the human development issues, a lifespan and life expectancy. You see life expectancy increase quite a bit. I can't remember what country has the longest life expectancy. It's Japan or Norway or something. You can look up to see what that is. But people can live well into their 90s and even 100s now with the kinds of food resources we have, with the kind of medical resources we have, and therefore the death rate is still going down, slightly, but birth rates are too. And so that is why we see stage 5 on the demographic transition model, where there are some countries, observable trends in some countries like South Korea, like Japan. This graphic that you're looking at puts Japan in the in stage 4, but this is about 20 years old, this graphic that I'm showing you here. So today you can look for statistics about birth rates and death rates, and you see population falling in a lot of places. Austria in Europe was one of these places. Germany it was one of these places. Japan, South Korea is one of these places where the young people today are opting not to have children. And a lot of times when they are asked, why don't you want children? A lot of times the cost that I mentioned, and also the inability to, the lack of desire to have to pay attention to something else that we in this modern society see as something that needs maintenance all the time. We have to, contribute all this time and energy into maintaining a child rather than the child brings benefit into the household. That was the old way of looking at children, before the Industrial Revolution and all the other industrial revolutions, the Green Revolution, the additional agricultural revolutions that we've had since then, that we will talk about in future lessons. But this demographic transition is a graphic way to look at the effects that subsistence strategy, which is your food getting strategy, medical knowledge and research, technology, levels of development, and also the introduction of widespread education among the population, the expectation that we will be educated individuals, that has changed society quite a lot. And we're going to look briefly in the next video at the epidemiological transition model, which shows in this same format of these stages, 1 through 4 is going to be on the next graphic. You're going to see what was killing people essentially, as far as the pathology of what folks were having to deal with, and why the death rate was so high and declined so dramatically over time here in this demographic transition model that we are looking at. So please make sure that you click on that link in our weekly folder. If you weren't able to do it while you were listening to this video, please do it now. Hopefully I was able to describe a little bit about what this looks like so that you could envision it in your mind if you were just listening to this. But please look at that graphic and text me with questions, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.